I used to believe the walls of my apartment were for keeping the world out. A fortress of solitude built from plaster and beige paint, where the only sound were the clicking of my keyboard and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I never imagined the person who would tear them down, brick by metaphorical brick, lived on the other side of one. His name was Julian, and for 2 years, he was nothing more than a source of noise, a disruption to my carefully curated silence. My life was a series of straight lines, a grid. I woke at 6:30, made coffee, wrote for 4 hours, ate the same lunch, and read until the sun went down. It was a small, predictable existence, and I liked it that way. It was safe. It was manageable. Julian's life, from what I could gather through the wall, was a chaotic explosion of color and sound. Loud music that vibrated through my floorboards. The boisterous laughter of friends I never saw. The heavy, confident tread of his boots in the hallway. He was a physical presence, even when unseen. A force of nature I felt as a low-grade tremor in my own quiet world. I'd see him sometimes by the mailboxes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a ruggedness that seemed out of place in our slightly run-down apartment building. His hands always looked stained with paint or grease, his dark hair perpetually messy, and he had a way of looking at you, not at you, so much as through you, that made me feel insubstantial. A ghost haunting the periphery of his vibrant life. He was in my mind an antagonist, the careless jock to my brooding intellectual. A trope, a cliché. I resented his easy confidence, the way he occupied space without apology. I resented the laughter that seeped through the walls when I was trying to work. Most of all, I think I resented him because he represented everything I wasn't. Bold, uninhibited, connected. The distance between us wasn't just a wall. It was a chasm of personality, a canyon of differing philosophies on how to live. He lived out loud. I lived in a whisper. Then came the storm. It wasn't just rain. It was a biblical deluge, an assault of wind and water that rattled my window frames and made the whole building groan. The sky turned a bruised, sickly yellow, and the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging my perfectly ordered world into a primordial darkness. I wasn't scared. I had candles. I had books. I had built a life that could withstand a little darkness. The power was out for hours. The sound of the storm was a constant roar, but underneath it, I heard something else. A frantic shouting from the hallway, then the unmistakable sound of gushing water where it shouldn't be. Curiosity, a feeling I usually suppressed, got the better of me. I opened my door a crack, peering into the dim, emergency-lit corridor. And there he was, Julian, soaked to the skin, his usual confidence washed away, replaced by a raw, wide-eyed panic. Water was pouring from under his doorway, a miniature river flowing into the hallway. He was yelling into his phone, his voice tight with desperation. "No, you don't understand. The pipe burst in the ceiling. It's everywhere." He hung up, slamming the phone against his thigh with a curse that echoed in the suddenly quiet hall. He ran a hand through his dripping hair, and for the first time, he looked small, defeated. He saw me then, a sliver of a man in a sliver of light from my doorway. His shoulders slumped. The Titan had fallen. The external event, the storm, had breached his fortress just as it had breached his ceiling. And it was about to force our two separate, hostile worlds to collide. He had to stay with me. There was no other option. The landlord was unreachable, the water damage catastrophic, and every hotel in the city was booked solid with people fleeing the storm. He stood in my doorway, dripping on my welcome mat, a duffel bag in one hand, looking utterly lost. My sanctuary was about to be invaded. Look, I know we don't really know each other," he started, the words clumsy, so different from the easy laughter I was used to hearing. "But I have nowhere to go. Just for tonight. I'll take the floor. I won't be any trouble." My throat felt like it was full of sand. My routine was shattered. My grid was broken. But I saw the genuine desperation in his eyes, the dark circles of exhaustion under them that were invisible from a distance. I saw a man, not a nuisance, not an antagonist, just a man whose world had just been washed away. "Okay," I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my own mouth. "Come in." He stepped inside, and my small apartment seemed to shrink around him. He filled the space, a mountain of wet clothes and quiet despair. The air, usually smelling of old books and coffee, was suddenly thick with the scent of rain and him. It was overwhelming. My carefully controlled environment had been compromised by this force of nature I had only ever observed from a safe distance. We didn't speak much at first. I gave him a set of dry clothes, an old sweatshirt and sweatpants that were ridiculously tight on his muscular frame. He disappeared into my bathroom and emerged looking slightly more human, his hair towel-dried into a chaotic mess. The silence in the candlelit room was a physical weight. It was heavier than any silence I had ever curated for myself. This was a shared silence, thick with unspoken questions and awkwardness. I made tea. It was what I did. It was part of the routine, a small piece of normalcy in a night that was anything but. I watched him as he sat on my couch, his large frame making my furniture look like a doll's set. And I started to see things. Details I'd never noticed from my window or in the fleeting moments by the mailboxes. There was a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. His hands, which I'd always seen as simply large, were a roadmap of hard work. Calloused palms, nicked knuckles, a faint dusting of white paint under his fingernails. He wasn't just a loud neighbor. He was a man who built things, who fixed things. A man whose own apartment was now broken. He held the mug of tea in both hands, as if absorbing its warmth. His gaze was distant, fixed on the frantic dance of the candle flame. My grandfather's watch was on a nightstand, he said, his voice quiet, rough around the edges. And a bunch of photos. I just grabbed my wallet and ran. It was the first crack in the facade, the first glimpse of the man behind the noise. He wasn't arrogant. He was just weary, overwhelmed. A wave of something I couldn't name, empathy, maybe, washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my resentment. He was just a person, and his life was just as fragile as anyone else's. The landlord will have insurance for the building itself. I found myself saying, the word coming out more steadily than I expected. But for your things, you'll need to file a renter's insurance claim. Do you have your policy number? He looked at me, his eyes focusing for the first time. There was surprise in them. I think it's in an email somewhere. I wouldn't even know where to start. And just like that, the dynamic shifted. Here, in my world of paperwork and quiet order, I was the one with the knowledge. I was the one who could help. He, the man of action and physical confidence, was adrift. I, the man of quiet contemplation, was on solid ground. I told him about documenting the damage, about contacting the claims department, about his rights as a tenant. I laid it all out in a series of logical, manageable steps. My grid. He listened, nodding slowly, a look of profound relief on his face. Wow, he breathed out when I was done. You really know your stuff? He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt a strange heat creep up my neck. Thank you. Seriously, later, as I was getting him a pillow and a blanket for the couch, our hands brushed. It was nothing, an accident, a fleeting contact of skin on skin. But for me, it was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure electricity that shot up my arm and exploded in my chest. My heart, usually a steady, reliable metronome, became a frantic, trapped bird, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. His skin was warm, slightly rough. The brief contact sent a cascade of sensations through me, a riot of feeling in a body accustomed to stillness. I pulled my hand back as if burned, my breath catching in my throat. I risked a glance at him. He was just looking at the blanket, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. Did he feel it? Did it mean anything to him? Or was it just an insignificant moment? Already forgotten? The storm outside raged on, but inside my apartment, a different kind of storm was brewing. A storm of longing and fear and a terrifying, exhilarating hope. He was here, in my space. The wall between us was gone, and I wasn't sure I ever wanted to build it back up again. We talked for hours. The tea went cold, the candles burned low, and the world outside my apartment ceased to exist. It was just us, two strangers in the dark, sharing stories that we'd probably never have shared in the light of day. He told me he was a contractor that he restored old houses, bringing them back from the brink of decay. He spoke about the beauty of old wood, the satisfaction of making something broken whole again. And then he talked about why he was always so loud, why there were always people in his apartment. "I hate the quiet," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "When it's quiet, I start to think. And I don't always like where my thoughts go." He stared into the dying flame of the candle. "I moved here 3 years ago after my mom died. Left my whole life behind. I guess I've just been trying to fill the space with noise, so I don't have to feel how empty it is." My carefully constructed image of him shattered into a million pieces. The confident, arrogant man I had invented was a fiction. In his place was someone lonely, someone grieving, someone who was just as scared of the silence as I was comforted by it. He wasn't my opposite. He was my mirror image, reflecting the same loneliness back at me, just packaged in a different way. "I get that," I said, the admission costing me more than he could ever know. "My quiet is a defense. If you don't let anyone in, no one can hurt you." He looked up from the candle, his dark eyes locking with mine across the small space. In that moment, the apartment wasn't small. It was the entire universe. And the silence that fell between us wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. It was charged with everything we had just admitted, with years of unspoken feelings, with the raw, terrifying vulnerability of two lonely souls recognizing each other in the dark. He was on the couch. I was in the armchair opposite, but the distance felt non-existent. I could feel the heat of him across the room. I could feel the pull, an invisible string tightening between my chest and his. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat in the sudden stillness. "This is it," a voice in my head whispered. "This is the precipice. I don't know who moved first. Maybe we both did." It felt less like a decision and more like an inevitability, like two planets finally succumbing to their gravitational pull. He stood up, and the floorboards creaked. He took 2 steps, and he was kneeling in front of my chair. The room was so dark now, with only one candle left, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. His face was inches from mine. I could see the flicker of the flame reflected in his eyes. I could smell the faint scent of my soap on his skin, mixed with his own unique, musky scent. It was intoxicating. My entire body was humming, a live wire of anticipation. "Leo," he said, his voice thick. It was the first time he'd said my name, and it sounded like a secret, a prayer. He raised a hand, his calloused fingers hesitating for a moment before they gently touched my cheek. His touch was not what I expected. It wasn't rough or demanding. It was tentative, questioning. It was unbelievably soft. A shockwave of warmth spread from that single point of contact, chasing away the chill of a lifetime of solitude. My own confession tumbled out, clumsy and breathless. "I've watched you," I whispered, the words hanging in the air between us. "From my window." For years a small, sad smile touched his lips. "I know," he said. "Sometimes I'd put on music just hoping you could hear it, hoping you'd know I was there, and that was it. That was the final wall crumbling to dust." He wasn't just noise. He was a signal, a message I had been too afraid to receive. He leaned in, closing the last bit of distance between us. His lips met mine, and the world just stopped. The kiss was not frantic or passionate. It was slow. It was achingly gentle. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of tea and rain and years of unspoken longing. His lips were soft, hesitant, moving against mine with a reverence that made my insides melt. I brought my hands up to his shoulders, my fingers curling into the damp fabric of his sweatshirt, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. It was a kiss that spoke of loneliness and grief and a desperate, shared need to be seen, to be truly seen. When he finally pulled back, our foreheads rested against each other. We were both breathing heavily, the sound loud in the intimate quiet. "I thought you hated me," he whispered against my lips. "I thought you didn't even know I existed," I whispered back. He stayed there, kneeling in front of me for a long time. We didn't talk anymore. There was nothing left to say. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a profound, peaceful quiet. The only sound was the beating of our 2 hearts, finally in sync. Eventually, the exhaustion of the night caught up to us. I didn't send him back to the couch. I couldn't. I led him to my bedroom, to my bed, a space no one but me had ever occupied. We lay down, facing each other, not touching, just a few inches of space between us, but it felt charged, electric. The single candle on my nightstand cast a warm glow over his face, softening the hard lines, illuminating the vulnerability in his eyes. He didn't try to kiss me again. He didn't try to do anything. He just watched me, his gaze intense and steady. And in that look, I felt more cherished, more known than I had in my entire life. I fell asleep to the sound of his breathing, a steady, rhythmic presence in the quiet dark. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel alone. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through my blinds. For a disoriented moment, I felt a sense of profound peace. The bed was warm. The quiet was soft, not oppressive. Then memory came rushing back in a tidal wave. Julian, the storm, the kiss. I turned my head. The other side of the bed was empty. The pillow was cool to the touch. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, pierced through the lingering warmth of sleep. My heart, which had felt so full and steady just hours before, began to shrink, to tighten into a painful knot. Gone. I sat up, my body feeling heavy, leaden. The apartment was silent, but it was the old silence, the empty silence, the one I had cultivated for years, the one that suddenly felt like a punishment, a prison sentence I had just been reminded of. I swung my legs out of bed and walked into the living room. The blanket I had given him was folded neatly on the arm of the couch. The teacup was washed and sitting in the dish rack. It was as if he had never been here at all, except for the note. A single, folded piece of paper on my coffee table. My stomach was a pit full of angry, buzzing bees. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was it. The rejection. The let's pretend this never happened. The confirmation that it was all a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by a storm. I had let him in. I had tore down my own walls. And he had just walked out, leaving them in rubble around me. The note was short. Terse. Thanks for everything. Jay, that was it. Thanks for everything, not, I'll call you not. Last night was amazing, just a polite, dismissive sign-off. The kind of note you'd leave for a stranger who let you borrow a cup of sugar. I read the words over and over, each reading a fresh stab of humiliation. The self-recrimination began immediately, a familiar, toxic spiral. Of course he left. What did I expect? I was a fool, a lonely, pathetic man who mistook a moment of shared desperation for something real. He was vulnerable, his apartment was flooded. He would have kissed anyone who showed him an ounce of kindness. And I, in my starved state, had devoured it like a feast, thinking it was meant for me. I crumpled the note in my fist, the paper crackling in the oppressive silence. My fortress was breached, and all I felt was exposed. Raw, stupid. I had allowed myself one night of hope, one night of believing that the crushing loneliness that defined my life could actually end. And the morning light had revealed it for what it was, a fantasy, an illusion born of darkness and candlelight. The rest of the day was a blur of anxious misery. I tried to work, but the words on the screen were meaningless squiggles. I tried to read, but I couldn't focus on the page. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, made me jump, thinking it was him. Coming back to explain, coming back to apologize, coming back. But there was nothing, just silence. A deeper, more profound silence than ever before. It was the silence of absence. The quiet was no longer my sanctuary. It was haunted by the ghost of his presence. I could still smell him on my pillow. I could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand on my cheek. My own home had become a monument to my foolishness. I didn't hear a sound from his apartment. No music, no voices, no hammering or sounds of repair. Just a dead, unnerving stillness. It was worse than the noise had ever been. The noise, I realized with a pang of bitter irony, had been a comfort. It had been proof that he was there, that he existed. This silence was a void. A full day passed. Then another. 48 hours of torturous, mind-numbing quiet. I replayed our conversation, our kiss, over and over in my head, searching for clues I might have missed. Had I said something wrong? Did I misread every single signal? The spiral of doubt was relentless. He regretted it. He was embarrassed. He probably thought I was some creepy shut-in who took advantage of him. My old life, my grid, my routine, it was all waiting for me to step back into it. But I couldn't. It didn't fit anymore. It felt like trying to put on clothes that were 2 sizes too small. The solitude I had once cherished now felt like a cage. He had shown me what was on the other side of the wall, and now that the door was closed again, the room felt suffocating. By the 3rd morning, I had resigned myself to the new reality. It was a one-night thing, an anomaly, a story I would one day look back on with a cringe of embarrassment. I would rebuild my walls higher and thicker this time. I would forget the feel of his lips, the sound of his breathing in the dark. I would go back to being the ghost in the hallway. It was safer that way. I was making coffee, going through the motions of a routine I no longer believed in when I heard it. A knock on my door. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was soft, hesitant. My heart stopped. Then it started again, a frantic, panicked thumping against my ribs. It couldn't be. It was the landlord. It was a delivery. It was anyone but him. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the coffee pot in my hand, my mind racing. Don't answer. Just pretend you're not home. Let him go away. Protect yourself. But my feet were already moving, carrying me to the door against my will. My hand was on the doorknob, my palms sweating. I took a deep, shaky breath and pulled the door open. It was him, Julian. He looked terrible. He was wearing the same clothes he'd had on 2 days ago, now rumpled and stained. There were dark circles under his eyes that were even deeper than before, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. The confident swagger was gone. He looked broken. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and profound regret. My anger, my humiliation, it all just evaporated, replaced by a surge of overwhelming concern. "Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside without a word, and he walked past me into the living room. He didn't sit down. He just stood in the middle of the room, his big frame looking diminished, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "I'm sorry," he started, his eyes fixed on the floor. "For just leaving. For the note. That was a coward's way out. I'm so sorry." I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed over my chest, a feeble attempt to guard a heart that was already hopelessly exposed. "Why did you leave?" I asked, the question coming out colder than I intended. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a raw, painful vulnerability that mirrored my own. "I panicked," he said, the words raw. "I woke up, and you were there, sleeping, and you looked so peaceful. And all I could think was that I was going to ruin it, that I was going to ruin you." He took a shaky breath. "My whole life, Leo, everything I touch, I either break it or it leaves. Relationships, jobs, everything. And that night with you, it was the first time in years I felt quiet, inside. The noise in my head just stopped, and it terrified me." He paced the small space, his agitation palpable. "I felt like I couldn't breathe. I thought if I stayed, I would just bring all my chaos into your calm. You have this life, this order. I just bulldozed through things. So I ran. I thought I was protecting you. From me." I listened, my defenses crumbling with every word he spoke. He hadn't left because he regretted it. He had left because he was scared. He was just as scared as I was. We were 2 sides of the same fearful coin. He ran from connection. I hid from it. But the end result was the same. Loneliness. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice softer now. "Sleeping on a friend's floor," he said with a humorless laugh. "My apartment is a disaster zone. They have to rip out the whole floor." But I couldn't. I couldn't come back here and face you. I spent 2 days telling myself it was for the best. That we're too different. That would never work. He stopped pacing and looked right at me, his gaze unwavering. And it was the 2 most miserable days of my life. The silence I was running from? It was nothing compared to the silence of not being here, the clarifying conversation, the honest confession. It was all laid bare between us. All the fear, all the insecurity. He wasn't the confident God I had imagined. He was just a man, terrified of being wanted, because he didn't feel worthy of it. I walked towards him, closing the space until I was standing right in front of him. "You didn't ruin anything, Julian," I said softly. My quiet wasn't peace. It was a cage. I was just too afraid to admit it. That night, you didn't bring chaos. You brought life. You made me feel alive. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He looked so utterly wrecked, so beautifully, painfully human. I reached up, my hand hesitating for only a second before I wiped the tear away with my thumb. "This is new for me," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "All of this. It's terrifying. But the thought of going back to the way things were before that storm, that's so much more terrifying." He let out a shuddering breath and leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes closing. "Me too," he whispered. "God, me too." We stood like that for a long time, just breathing each other in, a silent pact passing between us. A promise to be scared together. He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. It was a key. A single, shiny, newly cut key. He pressed it into my palm, his fingers closing mine around it. "My apartment is going to be a construction zone for weeks," he said. "But when it's done, I want you to have this, just in case. Or, whenever. So you never have to wonder if I'm there." It was more than a key. It was a promise. An anchor. A tangible symbol that he wasn't going to run again. That he was choosing to stay. I closed my hand around it, the metal cool against my skin. "You can stay here," I said, the words feeling like the most important ones I had ever spoken. "As long as you need. We can. Figure it out." Together, a real smile, the first one I had seen in days, finally broke through the exhaustion on his face. It was like the sun coming out after a long storm. "I like that," he said. "I like that a lot." And this time, when he kissed me, there was no hesitation, no fear. It was a kiss of homecoming, a kiss that promised a new beginning, built not on the rubble of our old lives, but on the solid ground we had found in each other. The walls were gone for good, and in their place, we were finally starting to build a home. The weeks that followed were a study in domestic intimacy. A slow, gentle weaving of two completely different lives into a single, cohesive tapestry. Julian stayed with me while his apartment was being rebuilt. My quiet, solitary space became a shared one, and to my surprise, it didn't feel crowded. It felt complete. Mornings were the biggest change. I used to wake up to silence. Now, I woke up to the sound of his steady breathing beside me. I'd lie there in the early morning light and just watch him sleep. The hard lines of his face would be softened, the constant tension in his shoulders gone. He looked young, peaceful, and he was here, in my bed. It was a miracle I rediscovered every single day. The first thing we did was make coffee. It became our ritual. He was clumsy in my small kitchen, his large body bumping into counters, his movements too big for the space, but it was a comfortable chaos. I'd grind the beans, he'd pour the water. We'd lean against the counter, sipping from our mugs, the silence between us easy and warm, no longer a void to be filled with noise or fear. We learned each other's rhythms. I learned that he hummed a low, tuneless sound when he was concentrating. He learned that I needed an hour of complete quiet after waking up before I could form a coherent sentence. He would read the paper while I stared into my coffee, and it was perfect. We shared meals. I, who had eaten the same sandwich for lunch for 5 years, was suddenly trying new recipes. Julian was a surprisingly good cook, and he filled my kitchen with the smells of garlic and roasting vegetables, aromas of a life I had never imagined for myself. We'd eat at my small dining table, talking about our day. He'd tell me about the challenges of matching new drywall to old plaster. I'd tell him about a breakthrough I had with a difficult chapter in my book. We were building a life in these small, mundane moments. Sleeping next to him was the most profound change. The first few nights, I was hyper-aware of his presence, the heat of his body, the weight of his arms slung over my waist. I barely slept, but soon it became the only way I could sleep. His presence was an anchor in the night, a solid, comforting weight that kept the anxious ghosts of my old solitude at bay. Waking up alone was no longer a fear. It was an impossibility. One evening, about a month after the storm, his apartment was finally finished. It was clean, smelled of fresh paint, and was completely empty. We stood in the doorway, looking at the blank canvas. "So," he said, turning to me, his expression unreadable. "I guess I can move back in." A familiar cold dread trickled down my spine. The thought of the wall being between us again, of sleeping alone, of mornings without him, it was unbearable. I must have looked as panicked as I felt, because his face softened, and he reached out, taking my hand. Or, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand, "I could just not. We could get a bigger place. Together." The breath I was holding escaped in a rush. Hope, bright and brilliant, bloomed in my chest. "Together? Yeah," he said, his smile shy but certain. "I'm kind of used to your terrible coffee and your quiet mornings. I don't think I want to give them up." And so we did. We found a place with big windows and enough room for his chaos and my calm. The process of merging our lives was a physical act. My books next to his tools. His loud, vibrant paintings on the same wall as my subtle, black and white photographs. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. He was the storm I never saw coming and the shelter I didn't know I needed. Julian wasn't a disruption to my life. He was a plot twist that rewrote the entire story. He didn't just tear down my walls. He showed me that the world outside them was vast and beautiful and so much better when shared. My life is no longer a series of straight, predictable lines. It's a beautiful, chaotic, wonderful mess. And I wouldn't have it any other way. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is the biggest risk you can take the one that involves tearing down every wall you've ever built? The very one that finally leads you home? What do you think is scarier? Letting someone in, or the silence that comes from keeping everyone out? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed our story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales about finding love where you least expect it.